Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today, we are going to talk about The Alchemist's Last Formula, a Hercule Poirot mystery, a story filled with shadows of science, secrets hidden in glass vials, and the sharp brilliance of Poirot's mind. So, sit back, and let's step together into the world of mystery. Chapter 1. The Invitation. It was one of those late autumn afternoons when the fog rolled thick across the streets of Geneva, muting the sharp outlines of the city's towers and dimming the glow of the street lamps until they were nothing more than halos of yellow light in the greyness. Hercule Poirot, small and immaculately dressed in his dark suit and bowler hat, sat by the window of his modest hotel suite, his moustaches gleaming like twin sabres under the careful grooming he had applied only an hour earlier. He was deep in reflection, his green eyes half shut, savouring the neat perfection of his daily routine. The shoes polished to a mirror sheen, the tie aligned precisely, and the order of the room around him untouched by disorder. Yet the peace of the afternoon was soon to be interrupted, for a letter lay upon his small desk, a letter which would draw him into a mystery as curious and dangerous as any he had yet encountered. It had arrived that morning, carried by a messenger boy in a hurry, and Poirot had at first dismissed it as another request for a trivial consultation. But as he read it again, there was something in the phrasing, something in the urgency, that commanded his attention. The letter was from a Monsieur Lucien Armand, a renowned chemist whose work was whispered about in both scientific circles and more esoteric salons. He claimed to have discovered something extraordinary, a formula that might, if the rumours were to be believed, transform the very nature of metals. But the letter was less concerned with boasting of discovery than it was with fear. "Monsieur Poirot," it began, "I beg you, come at once to my home outside Geneva. My life, I fear, is in grave danger. There are those who would kill for what I possess, and I cannot trust the police. Only you, with your famed little grey cells, may save me from a fate most dreadful. Tonight, at 8, I expect you." Poirot had read the lines with a frown, his fingers stroking his moustache. Now, as the clock struck 7, he adjusted his cuffs, collected his walking stick, and prepared to meet the strange alchemist who claimed to hold in his hand a secret as old as man's dreams, the power to turn base matter into gold. The carriage that carried Poirot out of Geneva clattered along the cobbled streets, before turning into a narrow lane lined with autumn bare trees, their branches clawing like skeletal fingers at the mist. At the end of the lane stood a mansion. No, more a fortress, dark stone walls rising against the fog, its windows shuttered against the outside world. There was something foreboding in its silence, broken only by the rustling leaves and the occasional cry of a night bird. Poirot stepped down from the carriage and approached the heavy iron gates. They swung open at his approach, as though someone had been watching and waiting. Inside, a gravel path led him to the grand door, where he was received not by the master of the house, but by a butler of thin frame and stern countenance, whose eyes flickered with an unease he could not conceal. "Monsieur Poirot, welcome," the man said, in a voice that seemed reluctant, as if he were ushering not a guest, but a witness into a place of tension. "Monsieur Armand awaits you in the laboratory." The interior of the mansion was a study in contrasts. The grand hallway bore the marks of old money and tradition, portraits of ancestors staring down with grim expressions, gilded frames catching the faint light of the chandeliers, marble floors polished to a sheen. Yet as Poirot followed the butler down a long corridor, he sensed disarray, as if the order of the house had been disturbed. A vase was cracked and glued together with little skill. A rug bore stains that had not been properly scrubbed out, and the air smelled faintly of chemicals. When at last they reached the laboratory, Poirot paused, for here was a room unlike any he had seen. Glass retorts and flasks gleamed on shelves, powders and liquids sat in careful rows, and the air was heavy with the mingling scents of sulphur, alcohol, and something sharper, metallic, almost acrid. At the centre of this organised chaos stood Monsieur Armand himself, a tall man with a mane of grey hair and sharp blue eyes that burned with a restless fire. He was no mere chemist, Poirot realised at once, but a man consumed by his pursuit, his hands trembling not with age, but with a kind of manic energy. "Monsieur Poirot!" Armand exclaimed, striding forward and seizing Poirot's hand with surprising strength. "You came. Thank God you came. You see, I am not safe. None of us are safe when gold is at stake." His voice dropped to a whisper, and his eyes darted toward the shadows of the room, as if he expected eavesdroppers. "I have made it, monsieur. The formula, the dream of the alchemists, the philosopher's stone of legend, it is mine. But they know, and they will stop at nothing." Poirot raised his brows slightly. "Mon ami, perhaps you will begin at the beginning, eh? A man cannot defend against shadows unless he sees the outline of the threat." Armand laughed bitterly. "The threat has no outline. It wears many masks. A rival scientist who envies me, a financier who covets what I have created, even those closest to me, my family. Perhaps even they would kill for it." His hands trembled as he pulled a small vial from a locked cabinet. Inside, a fine powder shimmered faintly, catching the lamplight like flecks of gold dust. "Here it is. With this, I can change the worthless into the priceless, lead into gold, dross into treasure. But it is not just wealth. Oh no, it is power, influence, kingdoms toppled and raised again. Do you see why I fear?" Poirot regarded the vial with cool detachment. "And yet, monsieur, if it is so dangerous, why not destroy it?" Armand shook his head violently. "To destroy it would be to destroy myself. This is my life's work. I cannot, I will not. Instead, I must protect it. And that is why you are here. You must help me. You must—" His words were cut short as the door opened suddenly, and a woman entered. She was elegant, draped in silks, her hair dark as midnight, and her eyes sharp with calculation. "Ah, my wife, Elise," Armand said quickly, his voice softening with both affection and a note of caution. "She knows, of course, but she does not believe." Elise Armand inclined her head toward Poirot, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, the famous detective. My husband thinks himself pursued by phantoms. Perhaps you will bring him back to reality." Poirot bowed slightly, studying her with keen eyes. There was intelligence there, but also something guarded, something watchful. As the evening unfolded, Poirot was introduced to the other inhabitants of the house. Henri, the ambitious nephew who had studied chemistry under his uncle's patronage, but whose own career had faltered. Dr. Keller, a physician and family friend whose visit seemed more frequent than mere medical necessity required. And Madame Veronique, the housekeeper of long years' service, whose stern face softened only when she spoke of her devotion to the family. Each greeted Poirot politely, yet beneath the civility, Poirot sensed tensions as sharp as wires pulled taut. Henri's envy was barely concealed. Keller's attentiveness seemed tinged with some deeper purpose, and Veronique's loyalty carried with it the weight of secrets untold. That night, after dinner served in a dining hall too large for its company, Poirot retired to his guest chamber, yet sleep did not come easily. The wind howled against the shutters, and somewhere in the depths of the house he thought he heard the faint clink of glass, the murmur of voices, a door closing softly. At last he drifted into uneasy slumber, only to be awakened by a sudden piercing cry. He leapt from his bed, threw on his robe, and hurried into the corridor. Others were stirring, lights flaring in the gloom. They followed the sound to the laboratory, where the door now hung open, and there, amidst the shattered glass and the stench of chemicals, lay Lucien Armand, his face contorted, his hand clutching at his throat, his body twitching before growing still. The vial of golden powder was gone. Poirot stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing, his moustache twitching ever so slightly. The alchemist was dead, his formula vanished, and within the walls of this fortress-like mansion lurked a killer. The game had begun. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. The scene within the laboratory was one of confusion, shock, and the faint acrid tang of chemicals burning into the air. The shattered flasks lay scattered like fragments of a dream turned nightmare, and in their midst Lucien Armand's body lay twisted unnaturally upon the tiled floor, his fingers curled tight as though he had fought to hold on to life, even as it drained away. Hercule Poirot, already awake to the smallest details, allowed his sharp gaze to sweep the room, not in panic, but with the practised calm of one who had stood at the threshold of death many times before. Elise Armand knelt beside her husband, her silk nightrobe trailing across the broken glass, her sobs loud, yet her eyes curiously dry, as though grief and calculation warred within her. Henry stood pale in the doorway, his hands trembling as though the sight of death had struck some deeper nerve, and Dr. Keller, the physician, pushed through at once, kneeling with brisk efficiency to feel for a pulse that Poirot already knew he would not find. "He is gone," Keller murmured, though his voice carried less sorrow than resignation. "The heart, it has stopped. Poison, I think. The spasms, yes, poison." Poirot raised a hand, commanding silence. "No one touches anything. Not a fragment of glass, not a single scrap." His tone, though quiet, cut through the fog of emotion with authority. He moved closer to the body, kneeling, his eyes narrowing at the faint discoloration along Armand's lips, a bluish tinge that spoke of some fast-acting substance. The vial of golden powder was nowhere to be seen, and the locked cabinet where Armand had stored it now stood open, its key still dangling in the lock. Poirot's mind, swift and precise, filed each detail away. A cry had been heard, meaning Armand was alive mere moments before the household gathered. The door had been shut, but now hung ajar. The vial was gone. The question was not only who had entered, but how they had known the key would be ready at hand. "Madame," Poirot said softly, turning his gaze upon Elise, who now rose with dignity from beside her husband. "You heard the cry, yes?" She nodded, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. "It woke me. I thought at first it was a dream, but then I knew something had happened." Her eyes met Poirot's, dark pools of both sorrow and something unreadable. "And you, monsieur?" Poirot asked, turning to Henri. The young man stammered, I had just gone to bed. I was awake still, reading. When I heard it, I ran." Dr. Keller added that he had been in his room on the other side of the corridor, that the sound had drawn him too. Only Madame Veronique, the housekeeper, claimed to have been asleep deeply, woken only by the commotion of voices. Poirot made no remark, but his eyes flicked to the positions of each. He knew well that what people claimed in the shock of discovery often masked what they had truly been doing. The police were summoned, though reluctantly, for Armand had dreaded their interference. Inspector Morel, a stout, practical man with a little patience for foreign detectives, arrived with his men and took statements brusquely, though he did not attempt to hide his irritation when Poirot quietly interjected with observations. Monsieur Poirot, this is Switzerland. We do not need your methods from Belgium or England or wherever else you parade them, he snapped at one point. Poirot merely inclined his head, his moustaches twitching with amusement. Nevertheless, mon cher inspecteur, you will permit that while you search for the obvious, I will occupy myself with the details, oui? Morel harumphed, but could not deny that Poirot's reputation carried weight even here. When at last the body was carried away, and the house fell into uneasy silence, Poirot retreated to his chamber, not for rest, but for thought. He sat by the fire, hands steepled, eyes closed, letting the little grey cells order themselves. What was certain? Armand was dead, poisoned swiftly and violently. The vial was missing. The suspects were all contained within the house. Motives abounded: wealth, ambition, resentment, perhaps even protection from a discovery too dangerous to exist. Yet Poirot felt there was more. He recalled Armand's fear, his insistence that even those closest to him might betray him. He recalled Elise's calm grief, Henri's trembling, Keller's swift pronouncement of poison, too swift perhaps, and Veronique's absence from the first alarm. Was it genuine sleep, or the clever alibi of one who acts when others dream? The morning brought grey skies and the continuing fog that cloaked the mansion in sombre tones. Over breakfast, though the food was untouched, the household gathered again. Poirot observed them in silence. Elise, dressed now in black, her composure remarkable for a widow of only hours. Henri, red-eyed, though whether from grief or sleeplessness was uncertain. Keller, brisk and businesslike, offering condolences with professional detachment, and Veronique, silent, her hands twisted in a cloth, as though wringing out some unspoken thought. Poirot broke the silence. Mesdames et messieurs, we are four walls enclosed in a mystery. Monsieur Armand is dead, and the formula is gone. Until we know who among us has played this role of assassin, none of us are safe. I will therefore begin my inquiries. His method was precise. He requested to see each person privately, beginning with Elise. In the drawing-room, he asked her of her husband's fears, of his enemies. She spoke smoothly of rivals in the academic world, of bankers eager to exploit him, but her eyes flickered when Poirot asked if she had herself ever feared what might come of such a discovery. Fear? Yes, of course, but more for him than for myself. He was obsessed. I only wished for peace. Poirot noted her choice of words. Peace, a curious wish in a house now filled with death. Henri came next, his youthful eagerness tempered by nerves. I loved my uncle, he insisted, though Poirot noted the bitterness when he spoke of how his own work had never measured up. He promised to teach me everything, but he never trusted me. He kept it locked away, as if I were a child. Poirot asked gently, And last night, did you see anything? Hear more than a cry? Henri shook his head, though his eyes slid away from Poirot's steady gaze. No, nothing. It was a lie, Poirot knew, but what had he seen that he dared not tell? Dr. Keller was next. His answers were precise, factual, delivered with the calm of one used to questions. Yes, poison. I would stake my reputation on it. Armand had enemies, yes, but within this house? I cannot imagine it. Elise adored him. Henri worshipped him. Veronique served him faithfully. No, monsieur, look beyond these walls. But Poirot was not so quick to accept. He asked Keller about the formula, whether he had ever been shown it. Keller smiled faintly. He boasted, of course, but no. He kept it hidden. I am a man of medicine, not of greed. Yet Poirot wondered, was there not power in such a formula for a physician too? a temptation to grasp what others could not. Lastly, Madame Veronique came. Her hands were still twisting her cloth as she sat before him, her eyes red, her voice low. "I have served the family for 30 years, monsieur. I raised Henri when his mother died. I cared for Lucien as if he were my own. Do you think I would harm him? No, never. But I warned him. I told him that gold brings only death. He laughed at me. He did not believe." Poirot leaned forward. "And last night, madame, where were you truly?" She met his gaze without flinching. "In my bed, monsieur. If you think otherwise, you will search my room, yes? You will find nothing." Poirot smiled softly. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But the truth, madame, it has a way of showing itself." By afternoon, Poirot walked the grounds of the mansion, the fog thinning to reveal gardens gone to decay, fountains dry, statues streaked with moss. Here, too, he searched for clues, footprints on the gravel, disturbances in the earth. Near the side gate he found something small, a scrap of paper, torn and half burned, with only a few letters visible. "Solet." He slipped it into his pocket, his mind already whirring. A solution, a solvent, something chemical, something that tied directly to Armand's work. That evening, Poirot gathered them again in the dining hall, not to accuse, but to observe. He spoke little, instead letting conversation flow, noting who watched whom, whose silences weighed more than words. Elise spoke often, her voice calm, her hand occasionally resting upon Keller's arm, with a familiarity Poirot did not miss. Henri ate nothing, his fork clattering against his plate with a nervous rhythm. Veronique barely touched her food, her gaze distant, and in the midst of them Poirot sat, his little grey cells dancing with possibilities, weaving threads into patterns, though the final picture remained just beyond reach. When he retired that night, he knew one thing for certain. The death of Lucien Armand was no simple crime of greed or passion. It was something larger, something woven with ambition, with secrets, with fears too deep to name. And within this house, locked in by fog and suspicion, the killer walked still, waiting, watching. Poirot adjusted his moustache in the mirror, his eyes gleaming. "Ah, mon pauvre Lucien," he murmured softly. "You were right to fear, but fear it is not enough. One must also prepare, and now it falls to me to see what you could not." Chapter 3. The Secrets Unveiled. The second day after Lucien Armand's death dawned grey and still, the fog lying low across the gardens like a veil reluctant to lift. Inside the mansion the atmosphere was heavier still, as though the very walls absorbed suspicion and whispered it back in muffled echoes. Hercule Poirot, ever fastidious, had dressed with care as though about to attend an opera rather than an investigation, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes polished to gleaming perfection. For him, order in dress was the reflection of order in the mind, and today he would need his little grey cells in their most orderly arrangement. For already he sensed that beneath the surface grief, beneath the polite silences of this household, there ran currents darker than gold or ambition. Breakfast was taken in near silence, each member of the household isolated in thought. Elise sat at the head of the table in black silk, her composure more remarkable than ever, sipping her coffee with steady hands. Henri appeared wan and restless, his eyes darting frequently toward Poirot, as though fearing some sudden accusation. Dr. Keller unfolded the newspaper with exaggerated calm, though his glances at Elise did not escape Poirot's notice. Madame Veronique hovered in the background, serving silently, her expression one of grim endurance. Poirot observed them all as a general surveys his battlefield, noting not the obvious, but the small betrayals of posture, the weight of silence where words should fall. When the meal ended, Poirot rose. Mes amis, it is time we speak plainly. There is among us one who has killed. There is among us one who holds the secret of the missing formula. And though the fog may hide the world beyond these gates, it cannot hide the truth forever. It is better that we open the curtains ourselves than have them torn away suddenly, n'est-ce pas? His words drew only silence, but he saw Elise's eyes flicker ever so slightly toward Keller, and Henri's fork clatter once more upon the plate before him. The silence was itself a confession. Poirot began his inquiries with the laboratory once more. The room had been sealed by Inspector Moreau, yet Poirot had obtained permission to examine it again. He walked slowly among the shards of glass, careful not to disturb a thing, his sharp eyes scanning the details that others had overlooked. Near the cabinet he found faint smudges upon the polished wood, not fingerprints clear enough to identify, but the suggestion of hands moving in haste. On the floor, beneath a table, a small object caught the light, a glass stopper, rolled into shadow. He bent, picked it up delicately with a handkerchief, and studied it. It bore a trace of some powder, not golden, but white, crystalline, dissolving even now upon contact with the air. Something chemical, something purposeful. Poirot tucked it away. Later, in the drawing-room, he summoned Elise. She entered with grace, though Poirot noted the faint scent of perfume lingering on her gown, incongruous for one in morning so newly begun. "Madame," Poirot began gently, "your husband, he feared those close to him. Tell me, did he ever speak of mistrust toward you?" She smiled faintly, though it did not reach her eyes. "Lucien mistrusted everyone, monsieur. He trusted only his formulas, his science. But toward me, he was devoted." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, devotion can become a prison, n'est-ce pas? A man consumed by his work leaves little for his wife." For the first time, Elise's mask cracked, and her voice held a note of bitterness. "Yes, he left little for me. No affection, no companionship. Only his vials and his powders. I was nothing beside them." Poirot let her words linger in the air, then said softly, "And yet you remained." She met his gaze sharply. "What choice had I? A woman must endure. But do not mistake endurance for loyalty, monsieur." She rose then, leaving the room before he could press further. Henri came next, pacing the floor before he even sat. His agitation betrayed him before words did. "Monsieur Poirot, you must believe me. I wanted my uncle's approval, not his death. Yes, I was jealous. Yes, I resented his secretiveness. But I could not kill him." Poirot regarded him calmly. "And yet, mon ami, you are the one who stood to gain much, were you not? Inheritance, reputation restored, perhaps even possession of the formula." Henri's face flushed. "If you think I killed him, then search me. Search my rooms. You will find nothing." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "But you saw something that night, did you not? Something you have not spoken of." Henri's lips parted, then closed again. His hands clenched. "No, nothing." He turned away, refusing to meet Poirot's eyes. The lie grew heavier. Dr. Keller was smoother, seated with his hands folded, his manner professional. "You suspect me, monsieur? A physician who has sworn to heal? It is absurd." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Absurdities, doctor, are often the cloaks for truth. You declared poison within moments. How were you so certain?" Keller spread his hands. I have seen death by poison before. The spasms, the discoloration, it was obvious. Poirot leaned forward. Obvious, perhaps, to one who administered it. Keller's eyes flashed, then cooled. I was his friend. Do not insult me. Yet Poirot filed away the flicker of anger, the flash of something deeper than friendship, in the way Keller's glance drifted toward Elise. And then Madame Veronique, the faithful housekeeper. She sat stiff-backed, her hands folded tightly. Monsieur, I told you before, I warned him. Gold brings only death. And now, see, it has. Poirot's voice was kind. Madame, you have served this family long. You love them, perhaps more than they know. But love can be fierce, can it not? Fierce enough to protect, fierce enough to prevent destruction at any cost. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice was steady. If you mean I killed him, you are wrong. I prayed he would abandon his work, but I could not. I could not. She broke off, her voice trembling. Poirot touched her hand gently. Courage, madame. The truth will come, whether by confession or by discovery. By afternoon, Poirot had gathered enough threads to see the outline of a pattern, though the weave was not yet complete. He walked the grounds once more, his sharp gaze taking in what others would dismiss. Near the fountain, long dry, he found footprints faintly marked in the damp moss, leading toward the side gate. They were small, delicate, perhaps a woman's, and caught upon the iron latch of the gate, a shred of silk, dark as midnight. He held it to the light, his mind immediately recalling Elise's gown of the previous night. Coincidence or clue? That evening, Poirot requested the cooperation of Inspector Morel, who remained sceptical. You play at riddles, monsieur, the inspector grumbled. We need facts, evidence, not your little grey cells. Poirot merely smiled. But it is the little grey cells, mon cher, which will show you the evidence when it hides in plain sight. Morel rolled his eyes, but grudgingly permitted Poirot to examine the laboratory once more. This time Poirot moved with even greater care, studying the cabinet, the vials, the stains upon the table. He noted a faint discoloration upon the wood, a mark as though some acid had spilled, and then, beneath the grate of the fireplace, he discovered ashes not of wood, but of paper, charred fragments bearing only a few legible words. Formula, irreversible, danger. He pocketed them silently. Returning to his chamber, Poirot sat long into the night, piecing together what he had seen. The vial of golden powder, gone. The stopper, with crystalline residue. The burned paper, words of warning. The silk caught on the gate. The bitterness of a wife. The envy of a nephew. The passion of a doctor. The devotion of a servant. Each thread tangled with the others. Each motive plausible. Each alibi uncertain. And yet Poirot felt the shape of the truth emerging. Faint, but unmistakable. Someone had killed not merely for gold, but for something greater. Protection, perhaps, or power, or love twisted into something deadly. As he extinguished his lamp, Poirot murmured to himself, "It is coming. The revelation. Patience. Hercule. Patience. Soon the truth will step from the shadows, and when it does, it will shine brighter than gold." The fog pressed close once more around the mansion, but within the secrets began to stir, restless, eager to be revealed. Chapter 4. The Final Distillation. Poirot leaned back in the high-backed chair of the country house drawing-room, the fire crackling low in the grate, throwing amber light across the sombre faces gathered before him. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the dripping sound of water sliding from the eaves, but inside, the tension had only just begun to unravel. "Mes amis," Poirot began, steepling his fingers, We stand at the end of a most curious investigation, one born of alchemy, obsession, and a formula that promised eternal wealth, but delivered only eternal despair. His dark eyes glittered as they swept across the group. Lady Gresham, pale with apprehension. Young Edward, with his fists clenched at his sides. Dr. Harcourt shifting nervously in his seat, and the solemn Inspector Graves, his pen poised over his notebook. The matter, you see, was never about gold, Poirot continued softly, but about greed. The late Alistair Wren, the so-called alchemist, may have died in solitude, but his work, his so-called final formula, did not perish with him. Someone here wished to possess it, to wield it, and was willing to kill for it. A murmur rippled across the room. Edward half rose from his chair, his voice sharp. "You can't mean one of us killed Professor Lytton. He was only trying to interpret Wren's formula. Surely no one would kill him over that." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "On the contrary, mon cher. Professor Lytton's death was no mere accident of a toppled lamp and fire. It was deliberate, a murder staged to appear clumsy, but executed with precision." He turned his gaze to Lady Gresham. "Madame, you feared exposure, did you not? You were in debt, desperate to restore your fortune, and the promise of an alchemical miracle tempted you." Lady Gresham gasped, shaking her head. I admit my interest in Wren's papers, yes, but murder, never." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Indeed, temptation, yes, violence, no. You lack the courage, though not the desire." His eyes shifted, now locking on Dr. Harcourt, who squirmed under the weight of his gaze. "And you, Doctor, you dismissed alchemy as nonsense. Yet I find it most curious that your medical bag was discovered near the study, hidden beneath floorboards, a place no honest physician would conceal his tools." Harcourt sputtered. I went there to save him. I tried to pull him from the fire." Poirot's voice grew sharper. "But why, then, was there laudanum in the glass beside Professor Lytton's chair? A dose too strong for mere sleep. A dose administered by someone with knowledge of tinctures and their potency. You, Doctor, sought to drug him, and when the flames consumed his body, you thought the truth would be consumed as well. But alas, ashes do not lie. The residue of laudanum remains, and so too does the truth." The room fell silent, save for the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock. Edward spoke at last, his tone incredulous. "So it was Harcourt all along?" Poirot nodded gravely. "Oui, driven not by science, but by desperation. He sought the formula for himself, believing he might transform it, profit from it, perhaps even perfect it. But in his arrogance, he overlooked the simplest truth, that every crime leaves its trace. The missing notes, the tampered glass, the hidden bag, it all points to him." Harcourt collapsed back into his chair, his shoulders sagging as though the very weight of his guilt had finally descended upon him. "I only wanted a chance," he muttered bitterly. "A chance to be remembered, to rise above obscurity." Poirot regarded him with quiet pity. "And yet, monsieur, you shall be remembered, but not as you wished. You sought gold, but found only ruin. Such is the fate of those who mistake obsession for brilliance." Inspector Graves rose, his voice steady as he declared Harcourt under arrest. The doctor offered no resistance, only a hollow stare as he was led away, footsteps echoing down the corridor like the final toll of a bell. The others sat in silence, the enormity of the evening pressing down upon them. Lady Gresham dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Edward paced restlessly by the window. Poirot, however, remained calm, sipping delicately at his tisane. "You see, mes amis," he said at last, Alchemy promises transmutation, the changing of one thing into another, but in the end it is not led into gall that concerns me, but despair into crime. That is the true formula we witnessed, and as always it is fatal. The fire crackled once more, spitting sparks into the darkened room. Poirot's eyes softened as he rose. It is finished. Professor Lytton shall have justice, and Alistair Wren's formula, if indeed it ever held truth, shall remain a mystery, locked away forever. Some secrets are best left untouched, n'est-ce pas? His voice faded as the clock chimed the hour, each note carrying with it the weight of finality. And thus the case of the alchemist's last formula was closed, an ending as inevitable as the pull of gravity, yet as haunting as the whisper of gold that never was. If this tale of mystery and obsession captured your imagination, do not let the journey end here. Subscribe, explore more of Poirot's cases with us, and step again into the shadows where every truth hides behind a veil of lies. Until then, mes amis, keep your little grey cells sharp.